Well, we know a few people are still entering our virtual room, but let's go ahead and get started. Today is December 1st, and thank you for joining us for the webinar today hosted by the information technology community of IFMA. Today's session will be recorded, and before you ask, yes, we will be sending you a copy of the recording. So thank you so much for joining us. And today I would like to turn it over to Ted Ritter, who is our global chair for the information technology community for IFMA. Ted, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here. I think this may be our last webinar of the year. I know it's going to be a good one. We've certainly done a lot this year. I think our membership's grown throughout the year, which is encouraging. And not only has the membership grown, the number of countries that are involved has also grown, which we also find very encouraging. IT community of IFMA has been around for over 20 years now, and we really try to answer the same question, which is how does technology support corporate real estate and FM? The fun thing about being in technology, it seems like something new comes up every 3 months. We're not answering the same questions. We're looking at different use cases continuously. We participate in most of the global IFMA events as well as other virtual events such as this one today. And thank you again for coming. And at this point, I'd like to turn this over to our panel today. Thanks so much to the gentleman from Contact.io, who's also one of the IT community's IFMA sponsors, and to Patrick with Trax Analytics. So with that, gentlemen, take it away.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Ted. So my name is Adrian Wygant. I am the Director for Smart Building Technologies at Contact.io. I've been working in the finance and technology field for the last 20 years and am responsible for everything smart building related. So from IoT hardware through data collection, data analytics, and workplace transformation studies. Kapil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey guys, this is Kapil Asher. I'm the Senior Director of Enterprise IoT Solutions at Contact.io. I own the healthcare and education practices verticals. So basically, I look over the sales and business development processes and also have some oversight on the product roadmap. I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
Okay, and Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. So Patrick Trevino, Executive Vice President of Trax Analytics. Just quick background. I come from the operational world of the IFM world, working closely with IoT technology to drive efficiencies in operations.
Okay, and so today we're really going to be talking about how technology, like from an IoT perspective, has been used very heavily in workplace transformations. So from an occupancy perspective, from an environmental perspective, but how that same technology is really being used across the board in all different types of industries. It's become a big issue because post-COVID, the whole hybrid working from home, remote working topic has been very big, and there's a huge ROI that can be generated by putting sensors into your building to find out how space is being used. So you can right size your portfolio, you can adjust your stacking mix to make sure that you have the correct type of workplaces for the way employees are using space. And that really generates a huge ROI that then facilitates using that technology for other use cases. And obviously with the new way of working, it's a real big buzzword. So everybody's been hearing about it. Is hybrid working here to stay? But with this panel today, we would also like to just talk about how the technology is being used in different ways, in different fields to generate alternative ROIs and use cases. And so as Kapil mentioned, he's responsible for healthcare and education. How have things changed for you post-COVID, Kapil?
Yeah, I think the COVID kind of put a lot of strain on healthcare, right? So in the past 2 years, there have been a lot of ups and downs with regards to employees coming back to the workplace, and also so much of turnovers have happened. Nurses have felt the burnout because of long COVID hours. Staying in the hospital on their feet all day long. many of whom have decided to quit and pursue some other career paths in the future, right? So I think health systems are turning back to technology to see how we can help them do more with less. So the work that was done by, let's say, 10 nurses per ward is now to be done by 7 nurses per ward, right? So how do we help them get more efficient to a point where they can do the same amount of work and provide the same amount of patient care quality that they used to before COVID with a fewer number of staff members, right? So optimizing workflows, automating workflows, making sure that the nurses are satisfied when they come in and feel safe when they come in to work every day is kind of where we are seeing a major demand from technology that Contact.io provides. So if you break it down by use cases, one of our major use case that came out of the pandemic was staff duress. So during the pandemic, I think about 40% of the nurse workforce in North America have reported some sort of a physical abuse, whether it's an attack from a patient or from a visitor or a loved one, family members. And this is just a reported number. I think the true number is much higher than 40%. And we are directly providing solutions to provide better response to such situations. So if a nurse is under attack, how do we make sure that a security personnel or the nurse's peers can get to the scene of the attack in a very quick manner, right? So that's where kind of our IoT solutions are coming into play. We have wearable devices that, with a click of a button, can enable a notification out to the responders. We are enabling a variety of modalities of how notifications are sent, whether it's text message or making a phone call to the security officer's desk, having a dashboard with alerts, a map view with alerts of where the situation is happening. We are also integrating with IP speaker system, VoIP phones, just to make it a very rapid response process, right? So that's kind of where the big push is from an IoT standpoint. The next one, which also falls under the bucket of staff safety and effectiveness, is hand hygiene. So hospital-acquired infections have always been a thing, but during COVID, it was one of the major issues because COVID was transmitting so rapidly from one patient to another or one staff member to another, where washing of hands became a very important factor. So now we have solutions that provide the compliance rating. How often are the nurses washing their hands? Are they missing any opportunity to wash their hands between patient visits or not? We can filter it down by department, by the individual person, and kind of provide some analytical reporting on how the hospital is doing as a whole. So yeah, anything that's related to making an efficient workflow for the nursing staff, making sure they are safe when they come into the building of their workplace is kind of getting a lot of demand in the marketplace right now.
Okay, and Patrick, have you seen any big change in your side of things thanks to COVID?
Yeah, especially in healthcare. I think one of the biggest ones that we've seen is, to Kapil's point on the nurses, focusing on the environmental services in the healthcare industry, of understanding where staff is being positioned, showing proof of service using IoT technology to passively monitor the environmental services to ensure that surgical rooms and rooms are being flipped in according to time to meet what the demand is in that healthcare is where we're starting to see a big push and utilizing IoT technology to drive environmental operations. Another aspect I wanted to touch on too was also the safety themselves of staff, of being able to monitor that staff to understand where your environmental employees are located, including dwell time, durations of operations, and also the ability to understand exactly, to Kapil's point on when a pin has to be dropped for an issue. Same thing when it comes to a hazardous issue that has to be equipped, and being able to utilize IoT technology, to use pin dropping technology to map a work order in place and navigate an environmental agent to go and service this location. That's where we're seeing a lot of drive in the healthcare industry, for sure, on the environmental side.
Okay, and so in the smart building side of things with carpeted space, where I'm seeing kind of the biggest drive is just purely on an occupancy side of things. So you put sensors on ceilings to find out how many people are in a specific area, to find out how they're using space. Now, what both of you mentioned ties a little bit into, wayfinding and where are specific people. That is something where in my field it's a little tricky, because you have personally identifiable data because you're tracking individuals versus space. But I'm seeing more and more willingness to bring that technology in because of the benefits that both of you mentioned in terms of staff safety. So if you have employees working late in a big office building, to avoid any liability issues, giving them a solution where they can press a panic button where where they are so you can respond quickly is a big one. And that ties into the employee experience side of things, because to try and bring employees back into the office, which is the opposite of healthcare, where everyone's already been there the whole time. In the carpeted space, post COVID, you had very low occupancies, around like 16% on average. And so right now the companies are trying to create an incentive, like a pull factor, to get people back into the office. And so that is, using IoT to find out how space is being used to optimize it, but also to create employee experience apps where you can then give them wayfinding solutions, because you have an agile environment. How do I get from A to B? How do I find my colleagues? Now, that's very specific and very expensive technology. In my field, or in the smart building side of things, the occupancy, so right sizing of real estate, generates such a high ROI that you can use that to pay for the wayfinding and employee experience side of things. Does that same technology find any use in your verticals, Kapil?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, wayfinding is it's a lot more prevalent in healthcare, right? Because think of high acute care centers where you would park in a parking lot, but you have no idea where to go for your examination or your procedure. And if wayfinding becomes a part of your health app, right, your MyChart app, where exactly you're meeting Dr. Smith, and Dr. Smith is in room number 305, but where is 305? We have no idea. So if your MyChart app has a navigation feature within itself, which is being served by the wayfinding beacons that Contact.io provides, now it reduces the anxiety of that patient, right, on how to navigate to Dr. Smith's office. So reduction in anxiety makes lives easier for the patient and the loved ones that they accompany. Which also helps in reducing missed appointments. So there is a study out there that healthcare incurs millions of dollars of loss because of missed appointments. So they allocate appointments for patients, but they never show up, and that's a cost which the healthcare has to incur on themselves, because that's not reimbursable by the payer community, right? So if we can reduce the metrics on missed appointments by providing a better wayfinding solution or an indoor navigation solution, then there is a lot of ROI to be achieved by the health system. The other aspect of wayfinding is it reduces the burden on hospital staff to provide directions to the patient, right? So that's the 30 seconds saved on a nurse's time when someone stops them to ask how to get to a certain location. Or it's 30 seconds saved on a clinician or a support staff member who's delivering equipment to the nurse's unit. They don't have to stop doing what they're doing just to help out a patient. So there's a bunch of different metrics we can calculate using wayfinding. And it's certainly a very beneficial use case in when it comes to patient experience enhancement processes.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in for one quick second, one thing that we've seen a major enhancement on when it comes to wayfinding is that oftentimes when someone thinks of wayfinding, they think of it in a one-directional perspective, where the wayfinding can actually be cross-utilized among multiple departments and have multiple benefits across when it's being measured as what is that return on that investment. It has to be viewed as how is that impacting the environmental side? How is it impacting nurses' time, duration of time, deliveries, all these different aspects that you come and all tie into what that return would be. One thing that I will say about wayfinding where we've found a lot of success is due to labor shortages here in the United States, and especially remote areas where some of these healthcare locations are located, is having the ability to understand and how do you expedite training? How do you expedite to get someone from the new hire process to on the floor to service? And having a tool like wayfinding where someone can easily navigate themselves throughout a building to know where they need to go based on whatever those routes are that they're assigned to, expedites that process and that training and bring the onboarding process as well.
Okay. Now that is all related to wayfinding. Is occupancy something that is relevant in your vertical, Patrick? Like, because in my field, it's all about, you know, how many people are at a desk or in a meeting room or traffic flows. Is that something that you would use too as a technology?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of the biggest requests that we get actually and especially in the CRE space. And it's if something is not being used or utilized or has been used, then can that cleaning route or can that routine be changed based on what that demand? So you're kind of creating a hybrid approach of servicing the scheduled services that align with what the demand is calling for that area to be serviced. And we use occupancy data to understand where to position individuals in areas of a building that for use case purposes. Yes.
Okay, so that's like a activity-based cleaning or something along those lines. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, from an operations standpoint, we like to call it more of a hybrid approach, right? The scheduled structure aspect of it. And then you also will have the data that we're collecting from occupancy sensors starts to create that data-driven approach to operations.
Okay, perfect. And Kapil, how about in healthcare or education? Is occupancy something relevant there?
Yeah, absolutely. So occupancy is, I would say in not so much in long-term acute care, but more in outpatient services, ambulatory services, clinical environments where you just have a quick visit and you don't stay the night, basically, right? In that case, high turnover is quite important. You can achieve a lot more if you don't have bottlenecks in your workflows, right? So knowing the occupancy of a room, how well the room is utilized, are you underutilizing your rooms or are you overutilizing your rooms is quite important in making some decisions in the future to improve your clinical operations, right? So for example, if you have 10 exam rooms, but your occupancy rate or the room utilization rate is only 50%, you're not taking enough patients to justify that facility's operations, right? So you may be able to intake more patients in a day and increase your top line revenue that way, right? Or on the flip side, if you're seeing your rooms are almost 90% occupied in the entire day, and you are stressing your system a lot more, that justifies the need to expand your facility, maybe buy the wing next door and expand your clinic into serving more patients in a day, right? So it's certainly very important, using this data as evidence to make future decisions into real estate expansions or into human resource expansions. It's not just ad hoc. Now you're actually using some data to help you make that decision.
Okay.
And Kapil, if I just jump in, I know that we're
Yeah.
speaking of healthcare, but we're seeing the exact same data being utilized in the aviation market as airports are expanding and they're trying to get an understanding of are our restrooms big enough, right? We're kind of in the restroom business a little bit on our side, but are our restrooms large enough to meet the demand that's currently there in the building, and what is the demand for the future state of what projections are for growth in the aviation market? And having that understanding allows capital improvement projects to be funded correctly and accurately to what that demand is going to be. So we're seeing the exact same thing in other verticals as well.
Now, Patrick, how do you go about determining the occupancy or the right size of bathrooms? Because in smart buildings, there's always kind of that fear of, people are tracking me as an individual, and there's a sensor on the ceiling that's watching me. I imagine for a bathroom that could be even more difficult by having like a sensor finding out how many people are there.
Yeah, so sensors are always these type of sensors are placed outside of restrooms and entryways. But that data that comes in and how we're collecting that data is very valuable. The best way to think of it, right, is we've all flown into airports where there's dwell times in restrooms that you have to wait to use the bathroom. So by having the data of understanding how many people are going in, the duration of time that someone spends within that restroom and goes back out allows them to understand the sheer size of how that bathroom should be either remodeled or a new terminal. And is here in the US, where there's infrastructure funds going into airports now that are being allocated for redevelopment, we're seeing a lot of requests for occupancy readings within restrooms to understand the sheer size that's required.
Okay. And Kapil, you mentioned you also do healthcare. Is any of this IoT technology used in that field, like wayfinding, occupancy, safety?
I think you mean education.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, so yeah, education, absolutely. I think staff safety is become a paramount use case in education recently. I mean, look at all the news that we have to read, unfortunately, on a daily basis, with sort of active shooter being the most drastic situations. But even if it's not an active shooter situation, I think, in K to 12 schools, violence is getting rampant on a daily basis, right? And there are mandates that are provided by, a few states now. New Jersey comes to mind, Florida comes to mind. State of New York is soon going to file a mandate for panic alarm buttons within education environment. So it's going to be mandate driven requirement for education to have sort of panic alarm buttons in classrooms, wearable panic alarms for every teacher or every staff member that enters the premise, just so that they can get response quickly when there's a situation that is going to go out of hand and the teacher is not able to resolve that situation on her own and needs external help to do that, right? So it is absolutely a paramount use case for Contact IO in education. But to Patrick's point, some of the environmental monitoring use cases are also important, right? Optimizing the energy consumption in a school facility, which is mostly public funded. You don't want the air conditioning to be on a cold winter day, or you don't want the heater to be on a hot day, right? So sensing environmental attributes like temperature, humidity, how's the air quality of the classrooms, are the students breathing safe air or not? All of that is kind of an important function of IoT that we provide. If we tie that into the building management systems, we can kind of actuate and control what to turn on, what to turn off based on the occupancy of the facility itself. So, that we've not gotten there so much in education. Mostly we are working all towards staff safety. But the good part about our technology is you install it for one use case and then kind of expand into other use cases as the need arises within that facility. So at least your initial investment is not going to waste, right? It just keeps expanding on top of that.
Okay. Now, one thing that I have like issues with, I guess, is pre-COVID, smart building technology was really something new that the early adopters would go after. So when kind of talking to potential customers, there was a lot of consulting that had to go on to explain, what technology is out there, what the value is behind it, the value proposition, and really explain why this technology is advantageous and what the drawbacks potentially could be. Because initially there was a lot of drawbacks where the technology, the sensor technology, IoT technology was very intrusive. People didn't know anything about it. They'd come into the office and they'd find something sticking to the bottom of their desk, pointing between their legs. So, obviously in the last 2-3 years, things have gotten quite a bit better, in part due to COVID, because occupancy measurement became not just a requirement in some places, but it also just became a necessity from a perspective of trying to get your employees back or make sure that they're safe when they do come back. So my life has gotten quite a bit easier now that smart building technology from an occupancy perspective, at least, has become more prevalent and more well known. When you're talking to your customers, do you need to explain to them the technology and point out the value proposition, or is it something that's already omnipresent and people just say, "Oh, I want it"? Kapil?
Yeah, I could go first. So I don't think we need to explain the technology as much as we had to maybe 5 or 10 years ago, or even like pre-COVID, really. I think people understand the technology pretty well. I think what I end up doing more on kind of our prospecting calls is show the differentiation, right? So like think of the wireless nature of our infrastructure. We don't require any data drops or power drops or anything, right? It's completely wireless. It just goes up in the ceiling. It's battery operated. It leverages existing infrastructure for data backhaul. So the ease of deployment, the ease of installation. You could come in and enable a facility within a matter of a couple of weeks. I think I end up speaking more about educating the customers about that aspect than the technology itself. I think, like Adrian, you mentioned, people know how occupancy works. People know how real-time location sensing works, but they just don't know which company to go with, because they don't know the different nuances between them, right? So I end up talking more about the competitive advantage we have than educating the population about the technology itself. I hope that helped answer your question.
Yep. And Patrick, on your side, do you encounter anything?
I would say the exact same thing. Years ago, I remember it being more of creating the demand and creating the educational format of what the benefit is of IoT technology and how it works. Now, with the amount of IoT technology that's out there and how information is so relevant for someone to research it, oftentimes, to Kapil's point, we're really showing what that advantage is of it versus how the technology actually works.
Okay. Now, are there any very specific challenges that you face when something gets implemented? Because in my field, I know that when it comes to employee experience apps, so an app that you give to employees so they can find their way through the office and book seats and use all the information that's actually coming out of there, the adoption rate of employee experience apps with employees tends to be very low because they're just not used to using that type of technology yet. Patrick, do you have any issues along those lines?
Other than losing sleep overnight over it, I would say two parts to this. What Trax has been able to, how Trax has been able to utilize our user interface, engaging directly with building our user interface based on what the clientele that's utilizing it, right? Taking multiple things into consideration, and especially in the janitorial and the environmental world, right? Technology skill sets, and also the ability of multilingual challenges that we face. When we work with contact and utilizing the beacons and the badges and the various different components that we utilize for your team, it really helps the fact that everything is passively monitored and passively done. So there's actually no engagement that staff member has to do to show like a proof of service, right? Or an area that was completed. When it comes to adoption, Trax itself has built out an entire client success department that actually focuses on the adoption. understanding various different training modules, various different training on-site, off-site, remote access. And as we have found success in being able to apply simplistic training documentation and training sessions, and training sessions as this as well, like as a webinar to explain how easy it is to adopt, has been a success to us. At Trax, we say if Uber Eats and Grubhub took 16 clicks to do it, nobody would order it, right? Nobody would utilize it. So we have that same mindset when it comes to the software itself, the UI component of it.
Okay, and Kapil, on your end?
Yeah, pretty similar to what Patrick said. I think in healthcare specifically, right? We don't want our users to worry so much about maintaining a system, right? They have a lot to do on their own, right? 8-hour shift is not enough to get through their day for what they have to do, right? And their first focus and their first priority is patient care. Not so much, oh, I need to maintain a system and interact with it a lot to get through my day. I think the technology and the apps that we provide are just an enabling tool, not the main focus of their job. So we have to make it easy to use, right? It just becomes a second nature for them to log into a system and kind of search for what they're looking for. Or if we are doing hand hygiene compliance, then they don't even need to worry about logging into the system. All they need to do is make sure they're washing their hands at a regular basis as per the compliance requirements. And then their supervisors or the compliance infection prevention officer, they look into the apps to figure out, like, what my analysis is showing me. So for us, we kind of make it very dummy proof when we develop our apps, that it's not going to be a heavy lift for our end users to understand and train themselves on. But it just becomes an enabler. It becomes an inherent thing that they just becomes a part of their day. And they don't need to really focus on it in their day-to-day life.
Okay. Now, the impression I'm getting from your industries is that things are relatively stable and they're progressing in a linear fashion. When it comes to smart building solutions and occupancy and the whole hybrid from work story, nobody really seems to know what the future holds in terms of, will people be working in offices? Will they be working remotely? How will they be working in the spaces? Will technology somehow fix things? So, the solution that I really pitch to clients is one that works and generates value regardless of whether people will be in the office or working remotely, because it generates a return just by optimizing your space in general. Do you see any big changes on the horizon for the way your customers use technology, or any big potential technology that you expect to see in the next year or two? Kapil?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'll go back to my original point of doing more with less, right? I think I spoke a lot about staff safety and kind of infection prevention aspect of it, but I think doing more with less is going to be kind of the mantra of 2023 and 24. As the workforce trickles back in, I think we are still in healthcare, in US healthcare market, we are still struggling with hiring, right? We are still, there's a major gap in open positions versus what's being closed on a daily basis. So I think the healthcare leaders are going to try to find technology to get their staff to be more efficient. Simple examples are, asset tracking. A nurse on an average, or a biomed staff member on an average, spends, I would say, 30 to 60 minutes on their shift just to look for equipment that they need for patient care, right? So if we can reduce their search time to matter of seconds, that's 30 to 60 minutes that they can refocus on patient care, right? Or if you take an average of 365 days, that's one FTE saved, right? So now they could do more work that one FTE would need to be hired to do the same amount of work, right? So those kinds of efficiencies are what will drive the next 2 years, at least in my opinion. And to get to that stage, we need to provide them with a ton of data. So we need to provide them with data of how the time is utilized amongst different activities within the nursing community. Are they spending too much time in the supplies closet? If they are, what's the reason? Maybe the supplies closet needs a revamp and make it easier for them to sort through things. Are they spending too much time on documentation? They're just sitting in a document area, writing up documents or reports. Are they spending too much time between shift handovers? Because, when a nurse leaves and another one comes in, they have to provide a handover. The patient case needs to be handed over to the next nurse. Is that time too much? And why is that time too much? So all of these detailed, minute information is going to be scrutinized in a good, positive way, not in a bad way. But it's going to get scrutinized in a way to figure out where the bottlenecks are, and reduce those bottlenecks and make it more efficient for them to operate in a day-to-day basis. So I think that's kind of where the trend is going to be for the next 2 years.
So you see really technology picking up and more monitoring, more optimization. So it's really going towards digital workspace. Yeah,
and I want to be very careful when you use the word monitoring, because I think it has a very negative connotation when you talk about monitoring. But it's more towards finding out how the time is utilized more than monitoring as such, right? So I don't think healthcare leaders care so much if you are taking 5 minutes of extra lunch time. Everyone is entitled to have some freedom in that arena, but they just they fear more about, like, are we introducing some inefficiencies in their daily work, which is negatively affecting patient care. So that's the kind of analytics they are looking for.
Okay. And Patrick, how do you see the future for your industry in terms of technology hurdles? Any big changes out there coming up?
Yeah, I'll pivot a little bit away from like the vertical itself, but kind of the end user. So facility management firms, BSCs, those type firms. There's been a shift in the past couple of years as IoT devices and technologies improved, where prior technology requirements within, let's say, an added value proposition for a proposal for services was usually always at the lowest tier, 5%, 10% grade. And we have seen a shift as agreements have now come in to be more performance-based agreements, that they are measured on various different KPIs, and some of these KPIs require IoT technology. So we've seen facility management firms, BSCs want to work smarter and incorporate the IoT technology themselves to the client and propose it as, we're going to come and service your building and we're going to do it very smart. And this is how we're utilizing IoT technology. And so we've seen innovation requirements in facility management RFPs go from being 5 to 10% requirement measure points to now being 15 to 25% requirement points as they get graded for how they innovate themselves.
Okay. Well, in the smart building field, I keep trying to figure out for myself what the ideal future would look like. And I'm a child at heart. I keep thinking of the Jetsons, like just stepping out of your vehicle onto a conveyor belt. It takes you right into your office, and everything is just ready the way you want it. And we're still a long way away from getting to that point. And not only that, we also just don't know, will the office be used in the way it's being used now in the future? In our office, because we work in tech, most people work remote and we're used to working remotely. How is it with your customers or you yourselves? Are you seeing a lot of people working remotely, or is it more back to the pre-pandemic of people being in offices? Patrick, you're smiling there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I technically live on a plane going from city to city, but I've always worked remote. But at our firm and what we've seen is, I think it's kind of a hybrid approach. Still having that collaborative team environment, working together in teams, both hybrid and in person. For our customer base, depending on the vertical, we're big in aviation and public transit. So a lot of those individuals are all 100% back to work in an office setting. Some of our other spaces that we work in, the CRE space, we have seen it slowly do an uptick. What we've seen a lot, and especially the utilization of IoT technology, is to create more of a desk reservation type system, understanding that this wing of a building is going to be utilized. Here's the data that's going to be serviced, and then since they're running a reduced staff, they can shift from one wing to another wing if need be. That's where we've seen a lot of that drive.
Okay, and Kapil, on your end, I know that hospitals tend to have quite a bit of carpeted space. Are they all back to work, or do they have remote work going on there too?
Yeah, so I think in a brief moment there, in about 2020, maybe early 2021, there was a lot of telehealth that took off because of COVID. I don't know if that stuck around to that level after the pandemic was kind of over. I think patients now are back to seeing doctors in person. I mean, there is a little bit of telehealth still going on because, there's always that remote patient that's 50 miles away from their provider, and it's not easy for them to get to the provider. So that's still there. But I think from the peak that happened during the pandemic, it's gone down since then. So yeah, doctors, clinicians, nurses, they're all encouraged to go back into their working environments now. So I don't think it's affected more in healthcare from remote versus in-person working environments. It's kind of, I would say it's back to the pre-pandemic percentage now. Okay. Now we've been talking about how IoT technology can generate value and can be used in different functions. In my field specifically, most customers or clients have a number of different solutions throughout their portfolio. So they'll have one type of occupancy sensor in one building, then another in a different one, and then they'll have 5 different software platforms for monitoring maintenance, reservation systems, occupancy. And what I'm seeing is a big drive to consolidate to fewer and fewer kind of solutions in-house. Luckily, from our perspective, our solutions do offer a wide range of different functionalities. So you can have the wayfinding, you can have the occupancy, you can have the asset tracking, all in-house. And for specific software solutions, we integrate with a bunch of players to make sure that the customer has 1 or 2 points of contact instead of like what used to be 5, 6, 7. Is that something that you were experiencing too, or is that completely different in your field? Kapil? Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. I mean, we work with IDNs, integrated delivery networks, which are made up of anywhere from 5 to 185 hospitals, right? And when you have such a big enterprise, there's obviously going to be buildings which have older technologies that are not consolidated. There are, people bought them in various stages of their journey. So we would come in and we would see 5 different things doing the same, the same outcome, right? And we are getting called to consolidate, right? We are getting, healthcare leaders are telling us, like, look, we have these 3 technologies, we would like to get rid of them. Can you support what they're doing right now? And our answer is a resounding yes all the time, right? And we take it a step further. We say that, hey, you're not just buying point solutions from us. You're buying an IoT platform that has visibility into the next 5 to 10 years of your expansion needs with IoT, right? So we are helping you get rid of those legacy technologies which are just there to do one thing, but we are also enabling you for the future to add on more use cases to this existing platform. And that's a major selling point for us. And that's why CTOs kind of love working with us, because it's making their lives easier.
Okay, well, and Patrick, I guess the same question to you. Are you experiencing similar?
Yeah, we're 100% experiencing that. The Trax platform is an agnostic system, so it's both agnostic, both software and hardware aspect of it. So we designed it that way as we saw the trend was going to building owners, facility management companies. Nobody wants multiple systems. People want systems to talk to each other. So the Trax platform, as we consume, data from your system into ours to do the trigger points that we need within our platform, oftentimes we're asked to grab that type of data and send that to a third party, whether that be a dashboard system, whether that be a work order management system or a venue management system. We tend to consume data, utilize the data for the frontline workers, and then transmit that data to a different platform for their data collection or their data lakes that they're utilizing as well.
Okay. Now, are there any kind of big hurdles that you've encountered that I haven't mentioned yet, or that come up frequently? Kapil, anything on your end?
So I think I think our when we are going through our sales motion, right, our sales cycle, I think, like I mentioned before, the education, we don't spend too much time in that aspect, because people by now know what IoT is and what they're expecting out of the system. It's pretty clear. It's a pretty mature market, and we don't need to kind of educate them on that aspect. We do educate them on the advantages of using Contact IO over some other competing vendor that they might be talking to. But then it all boils down to budgeting cycles, right? So that's where I always see a little bit of it takes some time to get through that. So budgeting cycles are depending on which hospital system you're talking to. They always pull the lever one way or the other between CapEx and OpEx, right? So if they have some leftover CapEx budget, they would want to buy it under that. Or if they don't have it, then they would try to swoop it under the OpEx budget. So we kind of tend to be creative in that situation. So, once we get that indication from the buyers how they want to go in, we become pretty creative and kind of mold our delivery aspect based on what budget availability they have. So yeah, that is one of the I would say the resistive path that we have to overcome during a sales cycle.
Okay, and Patrick, on your end, anything that I've missed? I'm sure there's plenty.
Yeah, we could be here for another hour on just the benefit of the IoT technology. But I think the biggest thing is when individuals think of this type of technology and how it can incorporate and show benefit, really homing in on how this technology can help them be more efficient, and not solely focusing on just that return on investment from a monetary standpoint, and viewing it from, to Kapil's point, the safety factor of it, the human element that comes to this as well, and the ability to be able to not just identify areas where staff can be reduced or increased, right, based on demand, but also the ability to be able to show that full transparency of your operation and have that as a training mechanism, as a tool, as a motivational aspect to the human factor of the individuals providing the work. I think that's a big, sometimes it's not viewed as a dollar figure associated to that, but it is. We've seen a lot of increasing in productivity of staff by understanding where they need to service and how they need to service those areas.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Well, I think we're winding down here. We've only got 10 minutes left, and I see there's a question, so I'll go through. How do you bridge IT and FM for implementation of smart solutions? Does either of you want to volunteer for that?
I'll take a quick snag at that one. I think when you implement this type of technology in IFMs, in that world is, it takes two parties to successfully do something. So having an implementation plan from the beginning, during that scope creation process of understanding what are the business cases, what are we trying to solve, what are we trying to achieve, and then building a plan that's going to align with those business cases, and then having an understanding of, you bring up the shift and change of how IoT devices were once viewed to how they're sold now and how they're communicated. That same type of mentality, as well as having a shift of change, right? I cringe when I hear disruptive technology. It just cringes me when I hear that, because technology is not supposed to be disruptive to an operation. It's supposed to enhance that operation. It's supposed to run parallel with it. It's a way to implement something without causing disruption to a workflow. Kapil touch point on the workflows. These type of devices can be viewed as something that's causing a disruption in a negative way, and it's causing a benefit, and there's a benefit to that. And by being able to highlight that benefit and utilize that during the implementation process to get everyone on board and excited, naturally increases your adoption rate and also the success of the implementation as well.
Okay. On that note, I'll kind of throw Kapil a bit of a curveball here, but in my experience, the people that you're pitching to and selling to when it comes to these solutions are usually not the IT department. And so they'll be all motivated and ready. And yes, you want to move ahead and we have the budget and everything's great. And then all of a sudden you're talking to the IT department, and they tend to not like new solutions. They fear change. So Kapil, any experiences or you'd like to share on that front?
Yeah, so that's a great point, right? So the beneficiary of our technology is the facilities management, the biomed, the nursing, even I would say the finance guys, who are the kind of the number crunchers, right? They are the beneficiaries of our technology, and IT is kind of the support arm of this, right? So IT does not see a direct ROI for their own department, and you could argue it's kind of a cost center for them, right? But that's kind of the beauty of our solution, is we are so light on IT personnel requirements, right? So we don't have on-site servers. We don't require network cable pulls, or we don't require a parallel network to just do one use case. It all becomes part of what they already have, leveraging what they already have. So in our case, the uplift that IT has to take up is so small that they don't usually resist, implementing this for the facility. I've worked in kind of IoT my entire career, and it used to not be like that. It used to be where there's a lot of IT involvement. There's a bunch of security documents we have to write. We have to kind of provide server specifications. We have to tell them where the cables should be pulled, and that would spin their heads all the time, and they would find a reason to not support, because they have 10 other things which are competing priorities. But now there is a paradigm shift in that, where it just becomes a blip on the radar for what they have to support, and that's in our favor.
Okay. Now, Patrick, you mentioned that you're big in aviation. I assume that the rules are more stringent there, or how does that work with putting technology into airports?
Yeah, I love my IT people. When it comes to it is, but it also depends on what the scope is that's being required. To Kapil's point, working with Contact, we've been able to. It's such a light lift for IT. Usually it's just a quick approval of the specs that's being put in, that there's not much resistance in that. I think more in the aviation market, when we start tying into buildings, networks, and different things, I think that's where it starts to get a little bit more gray, and understanding what those security preferences are. we're used to it. We're in about 45 different airports, so we've had our systems probably analyzed 45 different times in every which way before approval. But for the most part, we don't see much resistance in it.
Okay. Well, I mean, in my field, it's changed quite significantly over the past few years. I'd probably say 4 or 5 years ago, there were no network connections that you could access in buildings. Everyone would say like, no, it's not safe if you put anything here. So you needed to have a parallel network. So cellular network or your own, internet service provider pulling the cable into a building, which nobody wanted. And then once that became the norm, the IT departments started getting all antsy about the fact that there's third-party networks in their building that they can't monitor. And that was even more of a risk. And so we've kind of gotten to a point now where luckily most companies already have existing IoT networks that you can connect to as long as they can monitor the traffic and see what's going on. And so from that perspective, luckily, my sales pitch is relatively easy because as Kapil had said, it's very regimented, it's well tested, and it's very light on its IT touch. Kapil, did you want to add something?
I mean, just to add, I wanted to add. So all those parallel networks that you brought up right now, right? They were non-standard. They were proprietary with very little documentation. Usually an IT or a network engineer is pretty well versed on the Wi-Fi protocol and BLE protocol because that's open standards and everyone knows about it, right? But when you bring in a network that does just, it's monopolistic, there is not much documentation out in the world to understand how it works. And now you're putting the burden on the IT individual to learn this new network, right? And for what? Just for one thing. So that's kind of the frustration that I used to face before, but now that we are utilizing open standards, it just becomes a second nature to them. They understand it very quickly. Okay.
So I was looking at the time. We only have 3 minutes left, so I think we'll give everyone the opportunity for some parting words, if you want to. So, Kapil, anything you want to add before we wind things down?
No, I really want to thank everyone for this opportunity. I think this was a great conversation. I learned so much from Patrick and of course, Adrian, you always are great to talk with. I'm here, I'm sure my email will be shared with this recording when it goes out. So if you have any questions, even on a later point, please don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you.
Okay, and Patrick?
Same as Kapil, my contact information were there. If anybody has any questions or any additional clarification, feel free to email.
Okay, well then I will just echo everyone else's sentiment. It was great to have you on this call. Thank you to the IFMA team for hosting all of this and setting it all up. It was a pleasure, and I hope we provided some food for thought. And if there are any questions that do come through, please feel free to email us directly and we'll get back to you with any answers that we can come up with.
Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you to Contact.io for sponsoring today's discussion. I know I certainly learned a lot, and yes, we'll be sharing a copy of the recording along with the contact information for our presenters. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.